A Little Yuletide Murder, Chapter 8. My meeting with Cynthia lasted until 10. From the library, I went directly to the office of my dentist, Anthony Colorasso, who was also president of the Cove Chamber of Commerce. Tony was not only a fine and caring dentist, he was an avid fisherman with whom I spent many pleasant mornings on some of the area's tranquil streams and rivers in search of elusive trout. We always fished with barless hooks in order not to injure the fish we caught, enabling us to easily remove the hook from their mouths and send them back into the water for another day. I didn't have a specific problem prompting me to make my 10:15 appointment, but a note on my calendar told me it was time for my semi-annual checkup and cleaning. As usual, most of our conversation revolved around fishing, although the guzzling metallic paraphernalia in my mouth kept the talk one-sided. After agreeing we would be at a trout stream in the spring on the opening day of the fishing season, Tony said, shocking, what happened to Roy Brent. It certainly was, poor man. How could anyone do such a thing? Roy was a patient. I always enjoyed it when he came in. Never had a bad word for anybody, always laughing and joking. I'm told Sheriff Mortzger is focusing on Jake Welter as the most likely suspect. It was inevitable, I suppose, that Jake Welter would be caught up in our conversation. I could only assume his name was being bandied about all over town that morning, as it had been since the earliest moments following the determination that Rory had not died of natural causes. Amazing, I thought, how scuttlebutt takes on a momentum of its own, the mere hint of an accusation mushrooming into the assumption of truth. I said I just left Cynthia Curtis's office at the library, Tony, and spoke with Mort Metzger from there. He questioned Jake but released him. Frankly, I hate to hear this kind of rumor circulating. The man is innocent until a court of law proves him guilty. At least that's the way the Constitution says it's supposed to be. Rise, Tony said, indicating the basin next to the chair. I did as I was told. That's the problem when people create a negative reputation like Jake. Easy to think the worst of somebody like that. I know exactly what you mean, I said. Still, I hear Jake has a good alibi. I sat up a little straighter in my chair. Who did you hear that from? Susan Shevlin. She was the first thing this morning to have a fill-in replaced. Susan Shevlin was married to Kaboot Cub's mayor, Jim Shevlin, and operated the town's leading travel agency. I shook my head as Tom removed the bib from around my neck. My, how news gets around. She's right, though. Jake told Mort he spent the morning of Roy's murder fixing a stone wall with Mary Welter's brother, Dennis. Tony's eyebrows went up. I knew what he was thinking, that Dennis Sultan. Sultan was Mary Walter's maiden name. Might not be the best source of an alibi for someone accused of murder. Anyone who spent any time with Dennis knew that he was someone who agreed with anything and everything said, siding with totally opposing views as fast as they would be offered. Unlike his brother-in-law Jake, who argued with everyone about everything. You never heard a word of disagreement from Dennis. The word sweet was most often applied to him. I sometimes wondered whether labeling him mildly retarded acutely reflected his situation. He had the look of a beaten puppy, someone who'd been put down so often in his life that it became second nature for him to be so malleable that he came off as intellectually slow, even dim-witted. Dennis Sultan was as small as his sister was big, but he was a hard worker. No one would debate that. When he wasn't helping Jake on the farm, he hired out for yard work, snow shoveling, and other odd jobs. I hired him last fall to split 2 cords of wood from an ash that had died and fallen on my property. He attacked the task with vigor and dedication, swinging a heavy sledgehammer into the wedge he'd driven into each log with such energy that it tired me out just watching him. Are you saying that Dennis might be providing Jake with an alibi because Jake told him to? Possibly, isn't it? Said Tony, stripping off latex glove and tossing them into a special trash container. Seems to me it wouldn't be hard to get Dennis to say almost anything. I thought for a moment about what he said and offered. If that's true, then the opposite could occur. He could be persuaded to say something about Jake that would be incriminating. I guess it's a matter of who gets to him first with the most persuasive argument. I left Dr. Colaruso's office realizing how accurate his final comment had been. I also recognized that I, too, was feeding the Kabukov grapevine. I wasn't doing it for the sake of gossip. At least I hoped it wouldn't be perceived that way. I made a few more steps before heading home for lunch. Stops, including the post office, the bookstore, where I promised to sign copies of my latest novels, and our local fish market to pick up a bushel of clams for steaming. Everywhere I went, the conversation quickly turned to Roy Brent's murder and the suspicion that Jake Welter had done the evil deed. Happy to be home and away from the subject of murder and murderers, I placed water, 2 bay leaves, and a splash of white wine in the bottom of a very large lobster pot and put it on the stove. When it started to send up steam, I dumped in the clams. In the 10 minutes it took for them to open, I melted some butter, cut off 2 pieces of crunchy French bread, and settled down at my kitchen table for one of my favorite meals. Although it had stopped snowing, it was still very raw outside, a perfect day to stay indoors. Unfortunately, I didn't have the luxury of spending the afternoon there. I was due at our local community college at 3 to meet with Bob Vogat, Dean of the Creative Writing Department. He approached me a month ago to see whether I would be willing to teach a mini course in mystery writing. Under ordinary circumstances, I would have had to decline his offer because of the press of my own writing schedule. But as it turned out, I didn't plan to start my next book for at least 3 months, which gave me plenty of time to do those pleasurable things I, too, often never get around to. I enjoy teaching young writers and have been doing more and more of it over the past few years, including New York University and Manhattan, and individual one-day seminars at other institutions of higher learning. The clams were succulent, no surprise. After mopping up the last few drops of broth and butter, the final scrap of bread, I returned to correspondence I'd been working on the night before when Mary Welter's arrival had interrupted the process. I wrote letters until 2:45 when Dimitri Cassis arrived with the taxi to take me to the college. What is new about Mr. Brent's murder, Mrs. Fletcher? He asked once I got in the back seat and closed the door. I really don't know, Dimitri. Did Mr. Welter do it? Why do you ask that? Well, everyone says he did. Well, Dimitri, just because everyone says so doesn't mean it's true. I don't think anyone knows who killed Roy Brent, although I certainly hope they find out as soon as possible. He pulled out of my driveway and we rode in silence for a minute before he said, I don't like Mr. Welter. Have you had a problem with him? Oh, yes. When I first came to Kabuk Cove, I drove him to his house from town. He said we'd go in the house and get money, but he never came out. That's not very nice, I said. What did you do? Did you knock on his door? No, Mrs. Fletcher. I did not think I could do that. I had only been here a few months and had bought the taxi from Mr. Munro 2 weeks before. I did not want to make trouble. Well, people should be paid when they provide a service. Is that the only time you were involved with Jake Welter? Yes, ma'am. Although I have seen him many times in the town, he's not nice to people. Yes, I know. He isn't very pleasant. We said nothing else until Dimitri pulled up in front of the administrative building on the community college campus. Put it on my bill, I said. Of course, he said. You are my best customer. I'm glad to hear that, Mrs. Fletcher. Yes, I would not be surprised if Mr. Walther killed Mr. Brent, and I would be very sad. He nodded and said, I understand. You will call for me to pick you up? Yes, it should be in about an hour. I met Dean Robert Rook shortly after his arrival in Cabot Cove. He come to our community college from the English department of Purdue University, where he'd been rated the department's most popular and effective teacher. Having been born in Maine played a major role in his decision to leave a comfortable Midwest teaching position to take over a department at a 2-year community college. No matter what his motivation, he quickly became a valuable asset, not only to the college, but to the community at large. I judged him to be 40 years old. He had long blonde hair, the consistency of corn silk, and was blessed with boundless energy and enthusiasm. My first experience with him was when he put together a conference featuring Maine writers. I remember distinctly being impressed with how many writers showed up. Maine certainly has a share of authors and journalists. Since the conference, Dean Roke and I kept in touch, which led to his asking me to teach the course in mystery writing. His office seemed to have boundless energy too, if inanimate objects could generate that. Floor to ceiling shelves were crammed with books. Dozens of elaborately carved ducks, which he collected as a hobby, filled every space not occupied by a book. He wore a blue and white striped shirt, red and white suspenders, and a floppy yellow bow tie. Jessica, how wonderful of you to come. Right on time, I see, but that's no surprise. I've always suspected that mystery writers have to be punctual and organized. I laughed. Why would you assume that? Because in order to write a good murder mystery, the writer has to have an organized mind to stay on plot, or else the reader is cheated. Don't you agree? Well, I said, taking off my coat and tossing it on a chair, piled with books. I do tend to be a relatively neat and organized person, although I'm not sure that extends to my writing. At any rate, it's good to see you too. He realized I didn't have any place to sit and quickly emptied another chair of his books and file folders. Tea? That would be lovely if it's no bother. No bother at all. Back in a jiffy. He returned with 2 steaming mugs, handed me one, and settled behind his desk. So Jessica Fletcher, who killed Roy Brent? The bluntness of his question surprised me, and I didn't have a ready answer. I always say, my guess is as good as yours, Bob, or anyone else's for that matter. A shocking event. Certainly was. I didn't know Mr. Brent, although I think I met him once or twice in passing. Seemed like a nice fellow. Played Santa Claus every year, didn't he? Yes, and was wonderful at it. A shame we didn't know him better. He was a delightful man, not a mean bone in his body. A shame bad things always seem to happen to nice people. I nodded. Not lots of speculation in Cabot Cove about who killed him, he said. There was no escaping it. Here I was for the purpose of discussing the class I would teach, and the conversation immediately went to Roy Brent's murder, and rumors floating around town about who did it. Do you know this Jake Walther fellow? Yes, but not well. No one knew Jake very well because he preferred it that way. I know his wife a lot better. From what I hear, it's an open and shut case. I looked at him skeptically. I hardly think that, Bob. The man was questioned but not arrested. He has an alibi. He does? Yes. His wife's brother who lives on the property with them. I hadn't heard that. Good for him. I mean, lucky for him to have an alibi. I thought back to what Tony Colarusso had said about Dennis Salter not being a terribly reliable alibi, and wondered what conclusion Mort had reached after speaking with him. I was thinking just before you arrived, Jessica, about the potency of rumor, especially where murder is concerned. Have you ever dealt with that in one of your books? I shook my head. I've written so many I have trouble remembering specifics about some of the earlier ones. Yes, as a matter of fact, I did deal with rumors in a small town. The rumor became so persuasive that an innocent man was charged with murder. I hadn't thought about that book in connection with Roy Brent's murder, but now that I had the entire plot and many scenes dealing with it, came back to me. Aha, Bob said, sipping his tea. You could have a situation here with that fellow follows fiction. I don't think one has anything to do with the one other except as a coincidence. I then decided I might as well ask, what's the latest rumor you've heard? Obviously, I'm not as up to speed as you are. I had no idea Mr. Walther had an alibi. What I heard was that he was taken into custody and detained overnight at the jail by Sheriff Metzger. I thought back to the circumstances that led Mort to slap cuffs on Jake and bring him into town, but wasn't about to talk about it. Bob said, I read a number of your books, as you know, but I don't recall the one you've mentioned. Written a long time ago. Early in my career, I said it was called, let me see, it was called The Hanging Vine. I think I originally called it The Hanging Grapevine, but my editor considered it awkward. He felt readers would get the connection without including the word grape in it. I have to read it. I'll drop off a copy next time I'm here. So Bob, tell me about this mini course you want me to teach. I called Dimitri Cassis 45 minutes later and asked him to pick me up. Bob Roark walked me to the foyer of the administration building, where we chatted about the weather and the upcoming Christmas festival until Dimitri pulled up in his vintage station wagon. I'm excited about the course, I said, shaking Bob's hand. To have someone of your reputation teach at a community college is a real feather in the cap. A feather in my cap. I really appreciate it. What's the college doing concerning the festival? Lots. Musical and theater groups putting on performances. Should be fun, although the murder of Santa Claus takes the edge off it. I know what you mean, but I'm determined it won't. If only out of deference to Roy's memory, he would have wanted the festival to go on, as big and bright as ever. The first thing I always do when entering my home is to check the answering machine. The little red light was blinking, indicating I had received a call. It had turned out to be my publisher, Vaughn Buckley, calling from New York. His Buckley House had been publishing my novels for the past 10 years, and I was one of those rare. It seems writers was blissfully happy with my publisher and the job it does publishing and marketing my books. Over those 10 years, Vaughn and his wife Olga had become dear friends, and I often stayed with them in New York when visiting there. I returned his call immediately. Jessica, how are you? Fine. I got your message. I was at a meeting. I'm going to teach a creative writing seminar at our local community college. Good for you. Keep your eyes open for the next John Grisham. I'll do my best. You called. How's Olga? Tip-top. What's up? A brilliant idea from your publisher. I laughed. One of many. I read about the murder of that farmer in your town. His name, yes, here it is in the story. Roy Brent. A tragedy, I said. He was a wonderful man, loved by all. He played Santa Claus at our annual Christmas festival for the past 15 years. So the story indicates that was a peg the writer hung the article on, that a beloved Santa had been gunned down in Tranquil, Cove, Maine. I didn't think it would interest the press outside of this area, I said. An AP story out of Bangor, so what's the latest on it? No suspects, I said, a few accusations and mainly rumors, but no one arrested, at least as far as I know. Who's being accused? Vaughn asked. A fellow named Jake Walther. Jake is another farmer, an unpleasant sort, not liked by many people in town. The deceased son claims Jake killed his father, but has nothing to support that. Sheriff Metzger interviewed Jake at length and released him. From what I hear, Jake has an alibi, and Mort was checking it today. I haven't heard how it came out. How's your take on it, Jess? I don't have a take on it, Vaughn. Unfortunately, I got drawn in when Mort originally went out to talk to Jake. I'm friendly with Jake's wife, Mary, and she asked me to help. Jake was acting irrationally because he's convinced everyone believes he killed Roy, and no one will believe that he didn't. I suppose I can't blame him, although he's brought a lot of it on himself because of his sour disposition. As we say in Maine, he's some ugly, Ron laughed. Some ugly. Certainly descriptive enough. You folks up there do have a knack for turning a phase. On occasion, frankly, Ron, I'm trying to put it out of my mind, and focus on the upcoming holidays. I'm going to be reading Christmas stories to children as part of the festival. You remember my friend, Dr. Seth Hazlett? Of course. How is he? The same as always. He usually does the reading, but this year I'm going to share the stage with him. Should be fun. I wish I could be there. You can, but hotel rooms are at a minimum. You and Olga are always welcome at my place. I'll talk to her. Maybe plan to come up for a few days. I'd love it. So, what's this brilliant idea you come up with? That you shelve plans for your next novel and instead do a true crime book based upon this murder of Santa Claus. That never would have crossed my mind. I'm not a true crime writer. But you could be. It would be a nice change of pace, wouldn't it, dealing with facts rather than having to conjure up plots and characters? There they are right in your lap. You know them and you certainly know the setting in which this took place. Make a great book. I don't think so, Vaughn. Don't come to an instant decision. Promise me you'll think about it for a day or two. Readers love murder stories that take place in small towns, involving small town people. People getting knocked off in big cities are a dime a dozen. Well, not what Santa is murdered 3 weeks before Christmas. I'll think about it, only because the brilliant idea came from you, but don't count on it. Talk to Olga about coming up and spending a few days during the festival. You'll love it. I spent the next hour bringing down Christmas decorations from the attic, while I keep them from year to year. Vaughn's call had reminded me that there were indeed only 3 weeks left until Christmas, which meant I'd better get busy writing cards, making a gift list, and in general, pulling myself together for the holiday season. I was in the midst of reviewing my Christmas card list when Richard Colser called. Richard is a successful professional photographer who's taken the photographs of me that appear on my book jacket. He and his wife Mary Jane are superb chefs, adventuresome kitchen partners whose culinary expertise range from Indian to Thai, Tex-Mex to down-home New England clam bakes. Once I attended the dinner party at their home, featuring an array of Indian food dishes like hummus and chicken couscous and a dessert called gala tobacco, none of which pleased my pedestrian palate. I'm sure the food was superb. My reaction was not intended to be judgmental. Richard and Mary Jane understood. Italian dishes on acquired taste, they had graciously said. Just as long as you invite me to other dinner parties that aren't Italian Indian, I had said. The one to which I'd been invited that evening will feature, according to Richard, an unusual approach to New England cooking, and I've been looking forward to it since being invited 2 weeks ago. Besides, excellent food parties at the Kosher home were always spirited and enjoyable. Just making sure you'll be coming tonight, Richard said. Absolutely, I said. Who else will be there? The familiar and unfamiliar, he said, laughing. My agent from Boston and his wife are in town and staying with us. First from New York are also up for a few days staying at Jim Rich's Inn. Doc Hazlett promised to come by, and Mort and his wife are joining the party. Mort? I'm surprised. I didn't think he had much time for socializing these days because of the Roy Brent murder. Exactly. I tried to catch myself from asking the next question but failed. What do you hear about the murder, Richard? Not very much. I've been holed up in my dock room all day except for a quick trip to the barber. Word there is that Drake Walter did it. Quickly changed the subject. What's the special approach to New England cooking will be cooking enjoying the night. Not allowed to be a surprise. And the Mohammed